Hey guys, Hamsterwheel here, and today I'll be talking about Naxxramas. Once again. I know, I revisited my original Naxxramas video in the past, but only to correct some mistakes I made and add some extra commentary. The reason why I want to talk about Naxxramas again right now is because I recently cleared the entirety of Naxxramas on a private server. And yes, a private server is not a 100% accurate representation of Naxxramas in Vanilla WoW, because some of the damage values might be off, and on the private server I was playing, there were a few bugs in Nax itself, so it's not exactly the same. That said though, a lot of aspects are still the same, so I felt that doing Naxxramas on a private server was a good enough representation to now give you an honest review, so to say, of Naxxramas in Vanilla WoW. So, now that I cleared it, was it really that hard? Well, to put it very shortly, yes. And that's all I have for now. I want to thank you for watching this video. I'm Hamsterwheel, and I'm just kidding. Because saying yes is obviously not enough. And now that I experienced the full raid myself, I'm ready to start digging into how hard and elaborate raiding Naxxramas was in Vanilla WoW. So, I talked about what you need to get into Naxxramas before, but I want to elaborate on that a bit more. First, let me talk about the frost resistance gear. Like I said, you can't just go to the auction house and buy yourself a few green of the frost resistance items. No, you had to craft or gain frost resistance gear, and this gear wasn't exactly cheap. So I spent a whole lot of time farming mats to get the glacial gloves, the chest piece, the bracers, and the cloak. Thing is, that was not enough to get the frost resistance, so you needed to do the Echoes of War quest to get the Fate of Ramalatni quest, which allows you to obtain an epic frost resistance ring. And then I decided to get my Argent Dawn reputation up to Revered, so I could get the resistance enchant for the shoulders. And then I was lucky to find some random blue necklace on the auction house that had frost resistance and also some base stats. And then I finally had enough just to be part of killing Sapphiron. But hey, the resistance gear was the easy part. The most time-consuming thing when it came to getting ready for a Naxxramas raid was farming the consumables. Let me give you a quick rundown of the consumables I used in Naxxramas. You ready? Here we go. 10 major mana potions, 10 greater arcane elixirs, 10 elixirs of firepower, 3 Zandalar reputation tokens, 10 greater fire protection potions, 10 greater nature protection potions, 10 greater frost protection potions, 10 greater shadow protection potions, 1 brilliant wizard oil, 2 flasks of supreme power, 10 major trolls blood potions, 10 mage blood potions, 10 elixirs of fortitude, 10 juju chills, 10 juju embers, 40 blessed sunfruit juices, 20 heavy runecloth bandages, and 10 demonic runes. That right there is the minimum amount of consumables I carried for one raid. One raid. And you know how much those consumables would be if you would just buy them all off the auction house? Well, that depends on what private server you'll be playing, because every private server's economy is different, and I can only speak for mine. And admittedly, mine is kind of hyperinflated, so it's more than I'd say the average private server. But on my server, that would account for about 800 to 1,000 gold in consumables. Let me say that again. I would have an epic mount plus skill worth of consumables in my bag every night I would raid Naxxramas. And yes, I wouldn't use all of my consumables in one night, but if we had a night where our raid count wasn't ideal and we kept wiping on either KT or 4 Horsemen, you're damn right to be burning through those consumables and have barely anything left when we were done. Because of this very heavy grind, you cannot raid Naxxramas by being a raid logger. You can't. You're so reliant on these consumables that you have to do so much stuff on the side, either farming money to buy consumables or farm them yourself with herbalism and alchemy. Which I did. I leveled both to 300 and made most of the potions myself. And for things like greater shadow protection potions, I had to go to Duskwood, to the level 24-ish graveyard, to farm grave moss, to make shadow oil, to then eventually make the shadow resistance potions. I've had countless herb farming sessions so far, and sometimes even streamed them because I was kind of bored and also wanted to give people a bit of a behind the scenes look into Naxxramas raiding. Oh, fun fact, I went from having no bank slots and no alts to now having almost every bank slot on my main character and having 3 extra alts just for consumables and herbs. And managing and the consumables made me make my own spreadsheet where I can see what I take out and what I need to transfer to my main to be ready for the next raid. So I hope I was able to put in perspective just how much time and effort it took for one player to get prepared. Because if the people in the guild are all prepared individually, it doesn't mean you are ready as a guild to hop into Naxxramas. Because now I want to talk about raid night. Because you didn't just fly to Naxxramas and there you go, you're ready to rock. Nah, every raid night in Naxxramas started at Yojamba Isle. Yojamba? I'll just call it Yojamba. For the people that don't know, Yojamba Isle is an island in Stranglethornville where you can hand in coins, bijous and armor items that all drop from Zul'Gurub to get reputation or new items. But for us there are 2 things that count here. First of all, on this isle you could trade in a reputation token for a pretty handy buff, which is either the Sheen of Zanza, which would have a chance to reflect spells, a Swiftness of Zanza, which would increase your speed, but also a Spirit of Zanza, which would give you 50 spirit and 50 stamina. This buff lasted 2 hours, and for fights where you needed a lot of HP and or mana regen, this Spirit of Zanza was an absolute necessity. Thing is, you need to be revered with the Zanlar tribe to get this, so that's another thing to take into consideration. The second reason why everyone gathers there is the Spirit of Zandalar buff, which not only increases your movement speed by 10%, but also increases all stats by 15% for 2 hours. Thing is, that does require a Heart of a Car, which drops off the last boss from Zul'Gurub, so be sure to do at least 1 ZG run prior to doing Naxxramas. So once everyone got their Spirit of Zandalar buff and their Zanza buff, it was time to make a portal to Orgrimmar, because we're not done just yet. After that, it's time to get the Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer buff, which increases critical chance of spells by 10%, melee and ranged by 5%, and grants 140 extra attack power. That buff was insanely powerful in vanilla, so again, it's another must-have, but in order to get that buff, one of your guild members has to hand in either a Head of Onyxia or a Head of Nefarian, so yep, that also means doing an Onyxia or a Blightwing Lair run prior to Naxxramas if you want 1 head laying around just for that raid. Alright, now that everyone's in Orgrimmar and has the Dragon Slayer buff and the Zul'Gurub buffs, what's next? Well, it's off to Felwood. Well yes, Felwood. Because in Felwood you can cleanse flowers and those flowers give you an extra buff. The one you're looking for is the Songflower Serenade, which gives you another 5% critical strike chance for melee, ranged and spells. So then, after all that, we still have to go to the Darkmoon Fair, if it's up, to get the 10% extra damage buff by talking to Sage. And then, after doing all that, it's finally time to get a portal to the Undercity and fly to Light's Hope. But you better not get ganked there, else all that time and effort would be for nothing. So once you landed at Light's Hope, you would usually wait around for the rest of the people to arrive, so you run there as a big raid, minimizing the chance of people getting ganked individually. Once you're in front of Naxxramas, everyone starts buffing their groups, and when that's done, it's finally time to step into Naxxramas. Now, let me be fair in saying that world buffs were not necessary for all of the bosses in Naxxramas. I mean, bosses like Resuvius and Anubra Khan are doable without, but since we always wanted to clear the entire wing that we were doing, we always rolled with world buffs. Things like the Abomination wing were especially punishing, and it was usually the first wing we did, considering we were in the beginning all decked out with our world buffs and everything, which brings us to the first fight I want to talk about, Patchwerk. Now for me as a caster, Patchwerk isn't really all that hard, and in my raid footage it seems super easy. It was even easier in the beginning when I was forced to go Frost due to the volatile nature of raiding as a fire mage in Nax with the way Ignite works. Real quick because I'm getting sidetracked, but Ignite works in such a way that there's one Ignite on the target that all the other mages share. So instead of having your own Ignite, it's just whoever gets the first crit that gets the Ignite damage, plus all the other Ignite damage that the other mages add to that initial Ignite. That means that the Ignite dot can go up to 5,000 per tick, and that means you can over aggro very easily if you don't watch out. To save the raid some headache, new mages are just forced to go Frost until they've proven that they're decent at the basics and that they are reliable, which can take a month or longer depending on when you're finally promoted to a core raider, hence why in some videos I'm Frost spec instead of fire. But anyway, what makes Patchwerk so stressful is its enrage timer. And this enrage timer is pretty damn punishing. Before I started raiding on the Horde side, I briefly raided on the Alliance side with a guild called Certus Excessum. And most people in that guild had a boatload of tier 3 gear. So when you already have the Naxxramas gear, things like Patchwerk shouldn't be a problem, right? Not really, no, you're wrong. Even with all that gear and all those buffs, we sometimes came very close to that enrage timer, which really just shows how much of a DPS race this one is, even if you have all the tier 3 gear already. Now another boss I'd like to talk about is Thaddius, which is the one where you first fight the 2 ads, and then move up to the platform to fight the actual boss. Now, threat in vanilla is much more tricky, so as a caster you really had to watch out when tanks were swapped during the 2 ads, so no mindlessly nuking. Which is also why as a mage I had to resort to just using arcane missiles, for the most part, as ignite ticks could cause issues with threat. And Thaddius himself has that polarizing mechanic, which again isn't really that hard, it's just stay left when you have a positive charge and right when you have a negative. It's just again the punishing nature of when you do it wrong. One person standing in the wrong spot means he will do damage to all the other players with a different charge, and it's so much damage that that one guy can wipe half the raid in less than a few seconds. So I'd say the Abomination Wing was definitely the biggest gear check, but I'd say not the most complex one in terms of tactics. Oh no, that one definitely goes to the Death Knight Wing with the 4 Horsemen. Arguably the hardest encounter in Naxxramas because it is a gear check and very heavy on tactics as well. I can't tell you how many times we wiped on that boss simply because one person messed up. If let's say one person isn't stacked well enough when you get the meteor, 1 or 2 people might die. If you move too slowly and aren't enraged to heal people, people will probably die. If you accidentally walk into a void zone, good luck, you almost die instantly. You get too close to Zelig, you and people close to you will die. If you get wall mark too many, good luck, you're either gonna die of the dot damage or you're gonna exhaust healer's mana. It was a fight where there was so little room for error and the marks deal so much damage that everyone has to rotate. Which means that for each horse you need 2 tanks, because the tanks need to rotate as well. And there's 4 horses. So that's 8 tanks. And all those 8 tanks, by the way, cannot miss their taunt. Because if the tanks have to rotate and the other tank needs to basically grab that horse, if he misses his taunt, he won't get the aggro. So the horse will run off into the raid and give other people marks, which could probably wipe your entire raid. So he needs to hit with that taunt, which also means you need to have 3 pieces of tier 3 for tanks. But to be fair, you know, 4 Horsemen is one of the later bosses you do in Naxxramas, so that isn't really a huge problem. It's just another thing to keep in mind that you do need 8 tanks for 4 Horsemen, and all of them need to have at least 3 pieces of tier 3. The boss was also very heavy on consumables. For every fight you need to pop at least 1 greater fire protection potion and a greater shadow protection potion before you pulled, and during the fight another fire protection potion for Thane, and then another greater shadow protection potion for when Thane was dead, and you'd move on to Lady Blameau with the void zones. So per attempt that's 2 greater shadow protection potions, 2 greater fire protection potions, and a Juju Ember if you have those. And that's only the resistance stuff. I'm not even talking about all the other consumables you need to reapply if you wipe and you need to attempt this boss again. So yeah, there you go. Another boss I want to talk about briefly before I move on to the Frostwing, the last wing of Naxxramas, is Loatheb. As that fight is definitely another gear check, heavy on the consumables, and a DPS race combined. Loatheb is a boss that has a ton of HP, so in order to counter his enrage timer, your raid needs to kill spores that will spawn. Every time a spore spawns, one group goes up and kills it, and upon killing it, melee and ranged get 50% extra crit chance, and casters get 60% crit chance, which will definitely help boost the damage. The thing that makes this a DPS race, though, is the spell Inevitable Doom. Now, Inevitable Doom does 2,550 damage after 10 seconds, and Loatheb uses this every 30 seconds. So that's half of your HP gone if you're a caster every 30 seconds. So in this fight, you need to use at least 3 greater shadow protection potions. You need to use bandages and health stones just to help with the damage. And you might say, well, why can't the healers carry this? Well, that's because of Corrupted Mind, which basically means that all the healers have just one spell to cast every 60 seconds. And those most of the time can only go to the main tank, so healers have to have a careful rotation to make sure they don't dump all the heals on him at once. But that also means that as a DPS, you're mostly on your own in terms of eating that damage. This is why it's an absolute necessity to have multiple shadow resistance potions, bandages, and like I said, healthstones, because you can't rely on healers keeping you up. It's your job to stock up on consumes to keep yourself alive. That and Loatheb will start throwing out that inevitable doom every 15 seconds instead of 30 seconds after 5 minutes. So in reality you only have a 6-minute time window to kill this boss. Any later and it's most likely a wipe. So again, another fight that's very stressful on the damage, the consumables, and the tactics with that corrupted mind debuff. Which also explains why we did Loatheb pretty much all the time with world buffs, again because it's such a giant DPS race and such a gear check. So I could talk all day about going through Naxx, but to keep this video somewhat short, I'd like to talk about 2 more fights. Sapphiron and of course KT. Sapphiron was another gear check, as this is the boss where you need to whip out that frost resistance gear that you crafted or obtained through raiding. As a caster I was a little lucky because melee DPS has to get the most frost resistance gear, but I still had to aim for about 150 frost damage unbuffed, so I'd have at least 200 plus frost resistance when fully buffed. Even with all that frost resistance gear, this boss is heavy on the damage, and things like Blizzard, while easily avoidable, can kill you in a few seconds, so you have to move instantly as soon as it spawns on you. Another thing for me that I had to take into consideration was the fact that because of all this frost resistance gear, I had way less mana, so I went home very quick, which by the way was the same for a lot of fights in Naxx. But here's where a little neat trick comes in handy as a mage. You see, evocation in vanilla doesn't work the same way it did in the Burning Crusade and up. Instead of giving you a fixed percentage of mana back, evocation in vanilla is based on your mana regeneration. So what did you do as a mage? Well, you made a macro for evocation. First you'd swap out your weapon and wand for something with more spirit. Again, this could be some random blue item as long as it has more spirit. Then you'd evocate, and then you would switch back to your normal weapons. I mean, some mages in my guild even took it so far that they got the Will of Arlok from ZG, right? And then enchanted that with plus 25 spirit just so they could get as much mana back from evocation. Can you imagine running Zul group and some tier 3 mage is tagging along, finding out he's rolling on that healing staff, and then hearing him say, "I need it for evocation, bro." I mean, you'd probably call him a fool, but it's actually a thing. And some people even ran Zul groups specifically to try and get that staff. Hell, me and my mage buddies just called it the evocation staff. It was just generally accepted to be best in slot for evocation. Yeah, I know. Crazy raids call for crazy tactics. Speaking of crazy tactics, it wasn't uncommon that raid members had to be swapped out for whatever reason. And here's the thing. In vanilla you can't just summon a person in the world inside your raid. Oh no, you can only summon that guy if he's already inside Naxxramas. So what did people in the guild do to speed up the process? They made multiple accounts, level a warlock and 2 alts level 20, parked them outside of Naxxramas, and used that dedicated summoning team to summon players to the entrance of Naxxramas, and then those players would walk inside Naxxramas to then be summoned to the place where the rest of the raid was in Naxxramas. Oh yeah, that's how we roll in vanilla. Now the last boss, Kel'Thuzad. Oh boy, what a fight. And I'd like to point out that this boss is one boss where, like the 4 Horsemen, we would always roll with world buffs. We would do one initial try to get the positioning of players right, as everyone needed to have their own little designated spot, because it was 100% crucial that you would not stand too close to people for the frost blast. And when we felt confident about that, we all went back to Stranglethorn Vale and once again get the world buff so we could do KT. So again, that means back to Jonyamo Isle, then the Orgrimmar, then the Felwood, then the Thunderbluff to get for the Darkmoon Fair buff, of course, and then portal to Undercity, and then fly to Naxxramas again. And what did we do when we got back, buffed up, and wiped? We go right back to Stranglethorn Vale again to buff up for KT once more. And while we're on the top of getting buffed, Kel'Thuzad probably required the most consumables out of all of them. So this is a boss where you need to go 100% balls to the wall all out with your consumables. In an ideal situation, you would also take a resistance potion for each school of magic. So that means fire, shadow, arcane, nature, and in some cases even holy and arcane protection potions. But why, you probably ask? Kel'Thuzad only does frost and shadow damage. Well, yeah, but your other raid members don't. You see, Kel'Thuzad occasionally mind controls the main tank and 4 other people. If one of those 4 other people is a shaman, and in between him getting mind controlled and him getting sheeped, he casts an earth shock on a healer that just happens to be low health, he could die. And that one healer dying could set off a chain reaction. Not to mention the other 3 mind control players. One could be a fire mage doing an 1800 fire blast crit. Again, not uncommon when a mage is decked out with consumables and world buffs. So now that player gets a lot of initial fire damage and an ignite tick that could burn him to death. You just don't know. So in order to be sure that you'll have an extra line of defense against your own raid members, you would ideally go balls to the wall with your resistance potions and just use all of them. Of course, during the fight, you'd constantly refresh your frost resistance potions because the frostbolt volley deals a ton of damage. And it's very normal for DPS to stop whenever they can, to banish themselves up, because they can't expect the healers to heal them all the time. Let me put that in perspective. You have healers with a ton of gear, a ton of consumables, and all the world buffs, and even then, you'd still have to be banishing yourself whenever you can. And that frostbolt volley is raid wide. You can't line of sight it or something, you have to be able to eat it. I'd have to say that this is probably the longest fight, mainly because of phase 1 with the ads, which admittedly isn't too hard. I mean, as a mage, I just had to focus the banshees and then the skeletons, which admittedly die pretty quickly, so it's not too hard. And you can't really see KT as a DPS race, as there's just way too many things as a DPS that you have to do, like banish yourself, CC mind control people, or you have to deal with a fissure or a frost blast or whatever. So it's not really a DPS race. This also means that the evocation macro comes in very handy here, as you're really going to need as much mana as you can get. And unfortunately, the resistance potions share a cooldown with the mana potions, and you have to prioritize resistance potions over getting some mana back. This also meant that I would use lower rank fireballs on the skeletons in phase 1, since they have very low health, and I wanted to have a big chunk of my mana when phase 2 started. And then, well, killing Kel'Thuzad, I can't tell you how awesome it felt. I mean, I remember so vividly how punishing Naxxramas was back then, and how it was the first time our guild, which at the time seemed so unstoppable, hit a brick wall. I mean, we couldn't even clear one wing of that damn raid, and it seemed impossible to do it first. And then, months later, I would see Nihilum's world first on Kel'Thuzad. I was just in awe of that video. The gear people were wearing, the whole atmosphere of the Frostwing, as if it said, you just stepped into the Frostwing, the last wing of this godforsaken place. Very few have seen this part of Naxxramas, and today, you will face the last encounter in this legendary raid. That video has always kept with me, and the song that was used in that video brings back a lot of memories. And fun fact, I also used a remix of that song for my own Kel'Thuzad kill. Yeah, I know, clever. Anyway, I always looked at that video and thought, wow, I would love to be able to do that myself. After all, it's the encounter of all encounters in vanilla. It's the biggest, baddest boss fight in the entire game that vanilla would throw at you. And ever since 2006, remember, 13 years ago, I wanted to kill Kel'Thuzad. Then a few years ago, I did just that on Dalaran WoW, on the Wrath Lich King server, but you know, it just didn't feel epic, because again, it's Wrath, it's Naxxramas on the Wrath server, and it's only 10 man, so it wasn't quite the thing I wanted. You know, the dream was still there, and I needed to kill this guy on a vanilla server. And here we are, 13 years later. 13 years after I first stepped foot in Naxxramas. 13 years after we couldn't clear one wing. And here I am, having cleared the entire raid. I mean, again, on a private server, so it's not 100% accurate, but you know, this is good enough for me. I'm at peace now, as corny as it sounds. Well, I hope I was able to elaborate a bit more about how punishing and unforgivable Naxxramas is. And now I know why so many guilds fell apart. It's because raiding Naxxramas is really fucking expensive. I was lucky. I joined that guild when they already cleared Naxxramas. But can you imagine doing progression raiding in Naxxramas? where you burn through your consumables way quicker than we did. Imagine how fast people would get frustrated as every single wipe would cost them hundreds of golds in consumables. I get it now. I get why so many guilds either didn't want to do Naxxramas or just fell apart. It wasn't just the tough fights. It was just shitload of preparations everyone had to do for each single attempt of a boss. It's insane. And I'm glad it is. It's funny how a raid that barely anyone ever saw is still one of the most memorable raids to this day. And it's probably because of all the reasons I listed. Because some people just look in awe when they realize all the work that a guild needs to put into raiding Naxxramas, let alone clearing it. And I have the utmost respect for any guild and its players that has cleared Nax in vanilla, retail or private server. You guys are amazing. Including my guild Chaos, which is who I have to thank for this amazing opportunity. And there you go, folks. I hope I made things a bit clearer, and I hope this was a good Nax Revisited video. As always, I want to thank you for watching. I'm Hamsterwheel, and have a good one.